Charlie Keegan. My name's Josh Toller. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know it's valuable, your time's valuable to you. I appreciate you doing the interview today.
Sure, Josh, no problem.
So, there's been a lot of things in your lifetime, to name one, that's happened in your lifetime. To name one has been a lot of space exploration, right? Can you remember a time, when you felt the first time that you heard we were going to space, what it felt like? And what was your feelings about, that at the time?
Well, I remember I was a junior in high school, and John Kennedy made the comment that he's going to, during his administration, he was going to get a man to the moon and back home again safely. And I thought to myself, I was getting ready. I was considering going in the Air Force, and I was getting ready to enlist. And so when I went down to the recruiter, I was talking to the Air Force recruiter about an Air Force career, and I asked him if there was an opening for an astronaut. And he said no. Well, he says there's probably plenty of openings for an astronaut, but that might be a little premature for you right now.
Yeah.
So it made me a medic. So
There you go.
that's the first time I heard about it when I was getting ready to go in the Air Force.
Well, that's good. So, did you believe that there was a large universe out there? There's this huge space, and we're just like some kind of small pebble on the spectrum of the universe?
Yeah, I've always had an interest in space. Ever since I was a kid, learning the constellations, and seeing them in the sky, and following the Northern Star. My grandfather was a fisherman, and he told me about people that sailed by the stars before they had navigational equipment. So I've always had an interest in space. I was in the astronomy club when I was in high school, and it was just always something that I was very curious about.
Yeah. So when Apollo 11 landed on the moon and Neil Armstrong stated those famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," what was going through your mind?
Just what a enormous achievement that was. How you could actually go that far. And this thing that I'd seen since 1949 or 50, when I was born in 48, so probably as early as 2 years old, was always reading and had storybooks about the moon, the man in the moon, and all this. And to see somebody actually standing on that, it was just almost more than you could comprehend.
Yeah.
What an amazing feat that was, and what a great country we had.
Neil Armstrong also said that once he got on the moon, he realized how small of a speck he was. It's amazing how that makes you realize that the universe. Lots of people think the universe revolves around them, and so it's kind of unique that he finally felt like, oh man, the universe doesn't revolve around us. We actually are part of this little small part of this universe. So, what do you think about being a small speck in this wide variety of the universe?
Well, I don't know at what point I realized that there was more than one constellation, that our solar system, our planet's solar system, was just one of an infinite number. I don't know how old I was before I actually realized that, but it did. I mean, it kind of puts everything in perspective for you when you think, you're from a small town and you're going to a big city, and how small all that is compared to this universe, and how small our planet is compared to our sun, and how our sun is almost dwarfed compared to some of the stars. It just puts everything in perspective for you, and makes you keep yourself in check if you think you're kind of a big deal.
Yeah. So where do you think space exploration will go from here?
Well, I saw a program just the other day that talked about in the next decade they'll have travel to Mars.
Yeah.
And I guess since in the 1960s we were actually on the moon, I guess it's not inconceivable to think that in another 10 years we could be doing just about anything.
Yeah.
Interplanetary travel, and you know, getting from coast to coast in this country in an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess all that's very feasible, so it's almost, we're really limited by our own imagination.
Right. So did you ever think, there'd be a time in your life that you'd be talking about putting people on Mars?
Well, you know, I guess I never really took it very serious until we actually sent a spaceship successfully to Mars to take pictures. You know, and actually have a vehicle land on Mars to take samples. I mean, when you stop to think about the things we achieved, I guess I never really thought that that would be feasible in my lifetime. I think we're way ahead of where I ever thought we would be. So, you know, now when you stop to think that I'm 67 years old and we've achieved the things that we've achieved, you know, I guess my children and my grandchildren, before they become my age, are going to see a universe that would be beyond my ability to comprehend just how far things would go. I really never thought we'd be as far as we have come in my lifetime.
Yeah. So, due to the inspiration of space travel, did you get a chance to fulfill something in your life because you thought that it wasn't possible, but because of the things that you've seen play out, like landing on the moon and stuff, that you took a risk on and took a chance on and kind of took on your dream, you know?
Well, you know, I'll just say I was one of 6 children in a family, a man and a woman who were high school graduates but never went to college, and my dad was always a blue-collar worker. Raising 6 kids in northeast Pennsylvania, you know, it wasn't possible for us to really anticipate college wasn't something we talked about. I certainly had siblings that were brighter than I was, and none of them ever went to college. When I graduated, a lot of the guys that I was friends with were going off to college, but there was no money for me to go to college, so I started looking at alternatives. And I set myself a goal that said, someday I'm going to get a college degree. So I went in the Air Force, and while I was in the Air Force, I established myself with the VA representative at the base hospital. And he told me he would prepare everything necessary for me to be able to enroll in a local state university in Wichita Falls when I got out of the Air Force. And he made good on his word. And he helped me apply for my GI Bill, and through the help of the GI Bill and working nights and my wife working days as a beauty operator, I was able to go to college, and I was the first one in my family to ever go to college, and I graduated successfully. I never thought I could achieve that, but it's something I did. And a lot of it was inspired by the things I saw around me, what people actually had done and achieved in their lives, what we had done as a country in terms of space travel and other things. There's no reason that I couldn't get a college education if I really set my mind to it, and I did.
Well, that's a great feat. So there's a lot of civil rights movements in your lifetime, and they're still going on today, right? So what are the feelings of the country during your lifetime about the civil rights movement? What are some of the feelings that people felt?
Well, you know, you're a little young, Josh, but I mean, you would have had to read about this in books, but I actually lived through Selma and the 60s and the riots and the burning of Watts and the different things that affected this country associated with race. And I saw great strides be made in that. I saw the great society that LBJ tried to usher in, some of the things they tried to do for equal rights. I saw a lot of things established that made me feel in my life as I grew up that people really did gain equality. And, you know, I'll have to say that since we've been able to, I mean, let's face it, we got a black president. I mean, you know, people talk about inequality, and they still talk about being discriminated against, and I guess in some regards there is discrimination, although I'm not so sure that it's all about race anymore. It's about a lot of other factors. There is discrimination, but anybody, regardless of your color, regardless of your gender, if you want to achieve something, you can, and anybody can make an excuse for not doing it. But I think right now today in this country, I think there's opportunity for anybody that wants to take advantage of it, and there's no limit to what people can achieve. You've got a black man as a president. I mean, there's no excuse any longer for people not achieving what they have the ambition and desire and the will to do.
That's right.
So, in 1962, President Kennedy sent federal troops into the University of Mississippi to end riots due to the first black student coming to school there. Is there anything about this that you remember, or anything about this that you kind of thought, man, what's going on here? I know you were still kind of young. You were probably in your teens.
I was in the 8th grade. And, you know, where I went to school, from 7th to 12th, they were in the same building. So I was in the second year in a brand new school. I was an 8th grader. And I remember that going on. But in Northeast Pennsylvania, it probably wasn't as real as it would have been if I was being raised in the South. In my hometown, we only had one black family. So I wasn't accustomed to seeing a lot of blacks and didn't really understand what it was all about till later on in my life. The people that I knew that were black, the family that was living there, they were included in everything just like anybody else. They weren't looked down upon or thought any differently of than anybody else in our class.
Mm.
So I saw that, and you know, I didn't know what the big deal was about, because you know, we never questioned whether Cliff Cheeks could go to our school or not, or his sister, or his other little brother. I mean, it was just part of life.
Right.
They just happened to be a different color.
Right. And in 1963, Martin Luther King delivered a famous speech. I have a dream speech. And what was the country's attitude towards Martin Luther King's speech? How do you feel like the country reacted to that speech?
Well, I don't think the speech initially didn't have quite the impact that it did later on. You remember something else happened in 1963. This speech happened, and then a few months later, John F. Kennedy got assassinated, and that overshadowed this. This might have had a lot more impact than it actually did have if you were a child of the 60s, because nothing surpassed John F. Kennedy's assassination. It rocked this whole nation. Later on, that speech became a very vivid reminder of what we could do as a people if we worked and pulled together. And it really did a lot to help solve a lot of racial tension later on. Martin Luther King was just ahead of his time.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. So even today, there's some unrest and racism, right? There's a new movement, Black Lives Matter. You hear about it on the news all the time. What do you take on this current event?
Well, you know, my opinion is that there is a population of people in this country that have learned, and because of political activism, have become dependent upon government. And not because they have to be, but because they can be. And I think all the things that we planned on doing when we put a man in the White House of color has not achieved what it had the potential of achieving because of the politics of this individual. I think this man has taken that position and that opportunity, and really, because of the way that he utilized his power, he has widened the race gap in this country instead of brought it together. He had an opportunity to really make a difference, and he chose to make those people feel like victims. And he chose to create strife between the races. And because of his attitude and his political conviction, it's resulted in probably a bigger race gap in this country today than we had 8 years ago. And that's a shame, because he had an opportunity to close that gap and maybe even come close to eliminating it. He was the first black president. He had that opportunity before him. He hasn't achieved the things that position would have afforded him the opportunity to achieve.
Yeah. So, like we were talking about John F. Kennedy,
Yeah.
and there were some very popular and controversial things that happened during his presidency. You know, was Kennedy too gun-ho on the Vietnam War when he first got into presidency?
No, you know, John F. Kennedy, as I remember it, John F. Kennedy was not an activist about war. Now, he was really concerned about the Russians. But when the Vietnam War, he tried to downplay that particular conflict. You know, it was a conflict long before it was a war. And if John F. Kennedy had lived, I'm not so sure Vietnam would have ever gained the momentum that it did. I think his approach to that would have been a lot different, and it would have been a lot more diplomacy and a lot less military had JFK not died. But he did die, and LBJ took over, and LBJ escalated that war.
In your mind, what made Kennedy at the end of his presidency start to back off the Vietnam War? You know, he kind of started backing off at the end of his presidency you know, and no one really knew why, but he just started backing off for some reason. So what was the reason? He was trying to get the troops out at the very end.
Well, he was trying to, in my mind, he was trying to de-escalate that Vietnam conflict. He had a lot more concerns over other issues, and he had and this is my opinion, he had a concern about eliminating a people, freeing a people, or stopping the spread of communism in an area where the people didn't seem to want to resist. You know, so you ended up going into a foreign country, and you were the bad guy, not the good guy. We never were the good guy. We were always the bad guy, because there was not a clear enough definition of the good guys from the bad guys as far as the Vietnamese people was concerned. And, you know, I think John F. Kennedy saw that, and saw that the cost of that war couldn't be justified by what would be gained. He thought there was other ways and other matters in the world that were bigger priorities. Back in the country, back in the United States, there was a lot of businesses that wanted that war because they remembered all the money that was made off the last war. And war is really good for business, especially in the businesses that were in the state of Texas. So when John F. Kennedy failed, that's why that war was escalated. Because JFK was a Texan. LBJ was a Texan.
Yeah, there was a major contributor to the war or wanting to get the war started was a helicopter company out of Texas.
Yeah.
And they made a lot of money by people getting gunned down in the Vietnam War.
Right, they made the Huey helicopters there, you know, and then they had Northrop Grumman there too, made a lot of the jets.
Yeah.
They had a lot of military equipment that's manufactured in Texas.
Yeah.
A lot of military bases in Texas. They were ramping up those bases. They were training troops. I mean, it was a lot of things that really prompted and fired up the economy as it related to that war effort. And I remember as a kid, I remember JFK dying, and I remember LBJ. It was rumored, I never did hear him say it, but what was rumored was he told the politicians in Texas, you know, you get me in the White House and I'll get you your war. And he did.
Yeah, he did. Well, you know, is there anything else that you might want to discuss that maybe you thought about after we discussed a few questions and feel like you might want to touch base on before? Because that's about all the questions that I have for you today, and I appreciate your time.
Well, you know, I appreciate it too, Josh. It's kind of a trip down memory lane for me, because that's kind of the decade that I grew up in.
Yeah.
From the 60s and the 70s, I was in the Air Force from 66 to 70. I was part of the flower child generation, part of the drug experimenting thing, although I didn't do that myself. I was too preoccupied with trying to get an education. But it was an interesting time in this country.
Yeah.
And one that I think, because of the political leaders and the events of the day, did a lot to result in us being where we are today.
Yeah.
And I think they consider a lot of that to be the Great Generation. And I think the World War II parents were the parents of us children of the 60s. And you know, now as we reach retirement age and we start retiring, this country's going to be really challenged to come up with people to replace us. I don't know if the millennials are gonna be, if there's gonna be enough of them to replace all us baby boomers. And us baby boomers are the ones that were the children of the sixties, so
Yeah.
it's a big generation, it's one of the biggest generations.
That's what makes this a unique thing for me to talk about too, because you've experienced a lot of history in your lifetime. And it's amazing to think about how much you've actually gone through in your life. I mean, from when you were a kid to now, there's just so much things have changed, and dramatically too.
Yeah,
Technology wise.
I used to tell my kids I had it rough when I was young, because I used to have to actually get up and walk across the room to change the channel, to get out of the car in order to raise the garage door, you know? Really had it rough when I was a kid.
Yeah. Well, again, I appreciate your time, Charlie, and
Yes, sir.
thank you very
John.
much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, thank you.
Yeah.